Mesdames et messieurs, bonsoir. Cher André, dear colleagues, dear students, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome you tonight at the Geneva Graduate Institute for the official launch of the Hoffmann Center for Global Sustainability. The center we are inaugurating today has a history. In 2009, André Hoffmann generously founded a chair at the Institute, the André Hoffmann Chair for Environmental Economics. Professor Tim Swanson, who is here, so him is around here, was the first holder of this chair, which became the foundation for the creation at the Institute in 2010 of the Center for International Environmental Studies. For the last 14 years, the CIES was a very successful focal point for research on environmental issues. I would like to thank André for his support through those years. I would like also to thank Professor Tim Swanson and Liliana Andonova, who might be here too. I don't know if I'm seeing someone here. Oh, she's here. As the co-directors of the center for all those years. But I would also like to thank all the professors and researchers who've been involved through the years with the CIES, and they're all over here in this room, for the amazing work that has been done, for the research that has been produced, and for the visibility achieved. I would also like to extend my deepest thanks to the advisory board members of the CIES, some of whom are also today in the room. The CIES has become, through those years, an important platform where researchers, students, policymakers, and international organization representatives have worked together to produce high-level academic research and to find ways to connect this research to real-life policy and decision-making. The 4 research programs of the CIES have been the following: environmental governance, climate change, energy and innovation, resources and development, and agrarian environment and food system. When I joined the Institute 4 years ago and I met André for the first time, we started having conversations that clearly showed a common analysis and an alignment of vision. To define this in very simple terms, we shared the conviction, first, that sustainability was there to stay as a major issue for humanity. Second, that it had to be understood as a complex systemic issue and required a profound paradigmatic change. And third, that the transformation of education and leadership were key on that road. It has become clear for a number of years now that environmental degradation and associated resource scarcity are not merely environmental challenges, but that they are also tightly connected with economic, social, political, and geopolitical disruptions. From the perspective of the Institute, we had many internal discussions in the year that followed my arrival on how this impacted what we were doing and how we were doing it. As you know, the Institute was born in 1927 with a focus on peace and from the conviction that peace required international collaboration. Our internal discussions reconfirmed peace as our North Star and reaffirmed the importance of international collaboration. But we also collectively came to the conclusion that it was impossible today to separate peace from a focus on sustainability and equity. Concretely, this meant that there could not be long-term peace-building work without major investment in social and environmental sustainability. Said otherwise, the sustainability of our societies is a complex mix. The fragilization of the economy, of the social and political, through, for example, unhealthy levels of inequalities, and the environmental disruptions we humans are bringing to ourselves combine and reinforce each other in ways that represent major threats to our future and to that of our children and grandchildren, for some of us. It has now become quite clear that our current economic paradigm, and particularly its extractive nature, is an important part of the problem. We have to change paradigm to redefine value creation and progress as necessarily and intrinsically integrative of an environmental, social, and therefore peace dimension. For that, we will need leaders with courage, integrity, creativity, trust in themselves and in a desirable future, and with a sense of responsibility for collective challenges. This is exactly the kind of value compass that we nurture at the Institute through a pedagogical program that combines critical thinking, interdisciplinarity, collective applied research projects, and increasingly an opening to art and to the mobilization of emotions, the fostering of creative thinking, and of the exploration of desirable futures. At the Institute, we are convinced of the power of the imagination as a tool to shift perspectives and paradigms. 1 year ago, André and myself started to talk about the future of the CIS. It did not take us very long to agree that what needed to be done today was to build on what the Center had done over the past 14 years and expand it towards this integrative paradigmatic shift. The Geneva Graduate Institute is, in fact, a great place to do that. It's normal that I say that. A long tradition of transdisciplinarity can combine with a broad coverage of interconnected themes that characterize our research and our teaching, from peace, finance, development, health, education, environment, migration, democracy, technology, and global governance, to lead to the kind of systemic thinking that we need today. Another reason why the Geneva Graduate Institute is well placed to push such an integrative agenda is its situation at the heart of international Geneva, of the history of multilateralism and of its future, and as a connecting link between the three Genevas, the Geneva of international policymaking, the Geneva of finance and the private sector, and the academic Geneva. Finally, our particular approach to pedagogy and the training of future leaders that I described above is another powerful strength of the Institute. This is my own naturally personal and short summary of how the project of the Hoffmann Center for Global Sustainability came about. Let me at this stage express my heartfelt and deepest thanks to André for his vision and for the generous support he's giving to the Institute for the creation of the center. This is a very exciting moment for all of us. I'm convinced that the Hoffmann Center and the collaboration with André are going to make it possible to expand the range, the reach, and the impact of the research and the expertise we produce, but also of the talents that come out each year out of the Institute in the form of our alumni and alumnae. This is an important combination, producing knowledge and expertise to help transform the paradigm that defines our relationship with nature and with each other, but also training new generations that carry this new vision into the world of international policy making as much as into private and public organizations like our graduates do. As I mentioned before, the Hoffmann Center for Global Sustainability will build upon the strong foundations that were constructed by the CIS to become a leading research and policy hub in Europe dedicated to promoting integrated sustainability that is both nature positive and socially equitable. Beyond the 4 research programs of the CIS I mentioned already that will remain active, 3 new work programs will be added: Finance for Climate and Nature, Political Economics of Sustainable Governance, and Sustainable Global Trade and Development. The co-directors of the center are Professor Beatriz Veda de Moro, who is here, just in front of me, and who is going to become André Hoffmann Chair of Global Economics, Climate and Nature Finance, and Professor Dominique Renner, who is sitting next to her, who has joined the Institute a few weeks ago as Hoffmann Chair in Political Economics and Governance. Team Swanson remains for the next 2 years, André Hoffmann Chair in Environmental Economics. Imelda, whom I've seen also somewhere, is André Hoffmann Assistant Professor in Environmental and Resource Economics, while Julia Cajal, who is here, becomes André Hoffmann Chair in Trade and Development. Other colleagues who will be associated with the centers are Liliana Andonova, James Holloway, Anne Saab, Sheila Shishia Galvin, Amalia Ribi, Alice Pirlo, Umutil Derim, Philippe Cavao, Marc Ufti, Christophe Giron, and Joël Noailly. They're all here in this room. The center will also work in close coordination with many of the other centers at the Institute, and particularly with the Center for Finance and Development, well represented in the room too, and with the Center for Trade and Economic Integration. Let me now turn to the program for today. We will first start by a presentation and a discussion between André Hoffmann and Peter Vanham on their new book, The New Nature of Business, The Path to Prosperity and Sustainability. I will then have the chance to moderate a roundtable titled Why Global Sustainability? Around the table, we will have André, Patrick Audier, Marc Salvet from IUCN, Beatrice Veder, and Dominique Renner. And after the roundtable only, we'll open up for questions. So we won't have questions just after the presentation by André and Peter, to whom I now leave the floor. Thank you very much to all of you for being here tonight.
Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. My name is Peter Vanham, and I'm happy to be the co-author and today also the moderator of our initial discussion here with André. I have something very precious today with me, André, which is I have a copy of The New Nature of Business. You know, it's precious. I received it from Isabel. Thank you so much.
From Beatrice.
From Beatrice, sorry. Thank you so much. I received it. It's sold out. So is it even useful that we still talk about the book, André?
Well, if we define success as the amount of books sold, no, it's not necessary.
Well, I've went to check myself today at Payot, just a couple of 100 meters from here, and they still have it there. So anyone who would like to get a copy, you can get it there. And I'll leave the commercial break then, or promotion for what it is, and then let's turn to the discussion of today. I'm a journalist, André, and so a journalist is always focused on the question why, when, how, what. So the core questions. And of course, the question that we're trying to answer today is why global sustainability? And I want to ask you that in the context, in particular, we're here all today in Switzerland, in one of the two cantons, we should be proud of ourselves, no? One of the two cantons that actually voted in favor of an initiative that has to do with sustainability on biodiversity yesterday in Switzerland. So I don't think there's a better moment to ask clearly to the Swiss population, why do we need global sustainability, why do we need sustainability, and why do we need biodiversity, for example?
Well, Peter, thank you very much. I'm trying to recover from the incredibly elogious speech we just heard, which I thought was vastly exaggerated. But yes, of course, the question is a very valid question. You know, we just voted on a text proposed to what we call in French le souverain, an initiative for biodiversity. And the word biodiversity itself suddenly has taken a completely different meaning compared to what it was only a couple of days ago. You know, in biodiversity, we've gone from complete ignorance of what it is to poisonous relationship. From now on, if you use the word biodiversity in politics, you're in trouble. And for one, regret that we did not in the middle sort of stop at objectivity and realize that objectivity of biodiversity is actually saving life, it's prospering life. So the idea that 67% of the Swiss population has decided that they want to continue to destroy life, I find a little bit of a challenge. Of course, I'm simplifying, yes? I'm simplifying. But then so do politicians, so why shouldn't I? What is the book about? What is the new nature of business? It's just an attempt at trying to construct a future that would be sustainable. I was born at a time when there were about 3 billion people on the planet. There are 8 billion now, going towards the 10 until 2050, we're told. And the 8 billion people who live today live better lives than the 3 billion did 60 years ago. Oh, I just told my age. You know, today people live longer and healthier lives, better educated lives than they did 60 years ago, and that should be a reason for being happy. You know, this is prosperity. We have built prosperity, but we can also see at the same time that that prosperity has a huge cost, and the biggest cost I can think of is that in the same period, according to the Living Planet Index compiled by the London Zoological Society and published by the WWF, we have lost 67% of the species of vertebrate that existed in 1960. Now, this is a phenomenal amount of biodiversity that we have lost, and the speed at which we lose species is only increasing, it's not decreasing. At the same time, we have a lot of other symptoms. We have destruction of wild spaces, we have climate change, we have plastic pollution, we have unhappiness among the youth, we have unhappiness and anger, we have mistreatment of ethnic minorities. I mean, we have a lot. We have inequalities, of course, which are at an all-time high. I think all these issues taken together show to us that that particular model of prosperity is not sustainable. So we need to change something, and our proposal in the book is that we should include nature into the way we create value.
What I recall from that in this context is that why do we need sustainability? Because our prosperity is not sustainable. I want to turn then perhaps to the how and the what. And of course, in this audience, I suppose there's many people that are from business, but I suppose there's also many people that are from academics and from the international organizations. We're going to talk very briefly about the business part of the equation. How can companies achieve sustainability, or if that's not possible, how they can contribute to a world that is more sustainable when it comes to sustaining its prosperity?
Well, I think the root cause, if I speak a little bit about my private life, I come more from the sort of nature conservation side. My father was a zoologist. I spent a lot of time in nature. I was lucky enough to serve on the board of WWF International for a number of years. I think nature by itself has an intrinsic value. But then I don't see that value being reflected into the way we deal with business in general. Because besides being the vice chair of WWF, I'm also the vice chair of Roche, which is a pharmaceutical business, and on the one side we create value, on the others we try to defend nature. And it's only after a couple of years that I've realized that in fact, as the analogy we use in the book, we're all swimming in the same pool, we're all the same people, we're all in this together. If we neglect an element of society, it will eventually come back to harm us. So the mantra of business to just deal with shorter profit maximization while ignoring externalities is catching up with us. Externalities have now been to be internalized, and that's a cost that we have to bear as a society. So how do we measure success is a very important part of the process, and we should not measure success just on short-term profitability. We should look at impact, and impact on the three big capitals. Impact on the social capital, who are we together? Impact on the human capital. Are we individually happy? Are we individually fulfilled? And of course, nature, which is the life support system on Earth. And if we can put together a system that allows us to measure how we impact the system in which we are active, I think we can go towards this sustainable prosperity we were discussing before.
Yeah, and so that's a part of the answer of the how, isn't it, when it comes to business, is that it would be able to measure these capitals. And it's remarkable, isn't it, that you mentioned three capitals, when of course the fourth one is the one that people always focus on, which is financial capital. The second part, I think, of the equation that we've written about in the book is about let's say, the part that you can't measure, which is about leadership. And when you talk about leadership in business, you always talk about two concepts that are the concepts of humility and courage. Could you tell us why those concepts are so important when you think about how business can contribute to a more sustainable society?
Yes, just to follow on what I said before, if you really want to measure the impact we're having, we're going to need a new system which will allow us to measure this. And to be able to devise a new accounting, because that's really what we're talking about. So if there's a take-home thing that I would like you to remember when you go home tonight, accountants will save the planet, okay?
I was laughing because I already knew you were going to say that, André.
Well, that's the problem when you know each other since so long. But accountants are going to save the planet. I think that's an important statement. So the second part of the same statement is that if you really want to understand what needs to be measured, and if you want to enter into a situation with your mind open, you're going to have to be humble. You're going to have to be sufficiently humble to be able to accept the fact that you don't know everything. Now, that's not very human. We are engineers. We like to think that we have mastered everything just by creating a couple of equations, but we haven't. And it's important that we enter into this with sufficient humility to be able to really understand what the problem is. Once we know what the problem is, then we need to solve it. And that's why we need this combination of humility and courage. Now, look around you, these two things together are usually quite rare. Usually the people who take things, who take decisions, are people who are slightly arrogant because they believe they know better. And if we can sort of reconcile these two things, I think we can have a better chance of creating something that's grounded, something that's stable, something that is sustainable.
I can't help but now taking a brief break and saying, if you want to learn more about these concepts, you can read The New Nature of Business. Turning then finally,
Chapter 3.
Turning then finally to why we're here today in the context of the Graduate Institute and Marie-Laure so kindly hosting us here. Now, there's of course a role also, an important role for the academic world, and in fact you show that because you are supporting the Hoffmann Institute here. You also have Hoffmann Institutes in other universities and business schools. Why is it so important for you to also play in the academic world or to support the academic world? What is the role of the academic world in achieving sustainability?
So it has a lot to do about the decision-making process. And the decision-making process tends to be depending on the leadership of the institution in which you happen to be active. I think that leadership is not just an identification of particularly able people. It's also creating a system in which you can encourage people to take the right decision for the benefit of all. So it's important that an MBA class, for instance, does not teach you how to maximize shareholders' return, but to also think about the society and the purpose you are executing. So I always give the example of our company, our family company, Roche. We have a purpose. That purpose is doing now what the patient needs next. And in order to do that, we need to be concentrating on serving the patient community and not on making on paying higher dividend to shareholders. Now, as a majority shareholder representative of the company, I can tell you, Roche does not exist to make money. Roche exists to serve the patient, and if the patient is served properly, then there will be some consequences. But the first bit has to be to fulfill the purpose. So we need to get that included into the way we are dealing with decision making. Now, that's for private businesses, but for public businesses, we also need the same approach. So the Master of Public Administration that are created in a number of institutions will allow people taking the asset allocation models of public organization has to also rely on this particular simple system. We need to make sure that we serve the system, because if we don't serve the system, we're not going to be successful in the long term. So the third thing which I would think is important in academic institution is the fact that if we really want to have leadership, we need to be able to think and to express ourselves in an area of safety and freedom. And churning new ideas does not happen in the workplace. It happens in places where you feel safe to make these sort of statements. And that's one of the reasons why I think that the Graduate Institute is just a perfect place to talk about sustainability, because there is no sort of hidden agenda. It's not a question of profitability or political recognition. It's a think tank. It's an engine where you can actually elaborate new concepts, which I hope will be helpful for humanity.
If I can ask one last question, it would be this, and this is the journalist in me coming up, André. People might be sort of skeptical about the idea of another billionaire supporting financially, whatever it is that he or she feels like should be supported. And of course, you would fit that label, technically speaking. Tell us why your support for these kinds of initiatives is different. Why are you not that sort of stereotypical comic book kind of person that sort of advances an idea with their money?
So I must confess, this wasn't prepared. just so that you know. Yes, I remember the comic book. I remember Scrooge, Picsou en français, who used to swim in his money. My God. Well, I am deeply concerned, and I know it sounds a little bit blue-eyed, but I'm deeply concerned by the future of humanity. It doesn't look good. All the indicators I can think of are in the wrong direction, and it's something we need to do something about. Maybe new technology will bring some sort of respite on climate. Maybe particularly good negotiation will bring some respite on the international peace. I mean, all these things are possible. They are, however, not going to happen on their own, and we need to make sure that we participate into the way we can resolve this. So if you And by the way, that's true from all of us. It's not just true from the people who can actually pay for the bills. You know, it's true from all of us that we do need to think about sustainable prosperity if you want humanity to do well on the planet. And if you want humanity to continue to do well on the planet, we are going to have to take decisions which are framed on the work on the framework we've put out in the book, which is about measuring impact, helping leadership, and putting a value on nature. Nature-based solution. How can we use nature for stabilizing what's happening with humanity? And all these issues are happening. We just need to accelerate them. And if I can use my toolbox happens to be not just philanthropy, but also investment, also the way we manage our company. As I said before, Roche is a company which thinks for the long term, and I think that plays a role because we employ 100,000 people, and that's something that in society is an important consideration. So this is not just an idea of giving money to people who are doing the job, it's an idea of also spending as much time as I can to move that agenda. And I have the weakness of believing that it's not my agenda, it's our agenda. Mm.
Yeah, and thank you. And I think that's if I could allow my answer to that question, which is the difference that I see between that stereotypical image and what you do is that you don't lead from the front, but you lead from the back, and that you allow people to discuss, to exchange ideas and let the best ideas win. And I think that's also, by the way, a bridge to what we're going to do now with the rest of the panel. André, thank you so much for joining us in this discussion, and I wish you all the best in the discussion of the panel. Thank you.
Can you hear? It's not good, is it? Okay. I'll bring it closer to my lips. Non, mais Patrice, viens, je me lève. I don't know. Merci beaucoup.
Patrick, tu veux bien là? Communique, voilà, parfait. Is that working? Yeah, that's working. Wonderful. Thank you. So thank you so much, André and Peter. And this was really a very fast-paced but very, very clear, plaidoyer for reading the book, which, by the way, I did already. But I can reread it with great pleasure. André, I'm going to start with you, and I have a first question for you, which really is connected with the global in why global sustainability. We are, after all, in Geneva, at the heart of international Geneva. So what's the role? Is there a role, in fact, for international organizations, multilateral actors of different kinds in that fight that you very clearly explained to us?
First of all, thank you very much for organizing all this evening, and thank you very much for mentioning that particular question, because I think that's absolutely one of the benefits of the International Geneva, is that here we can actually talk in a sort of global way and not only talk into national ways. I was just referring to the biodiversity initiative. That biodiversity initiative was a very local issue dealing with a world problem. I mean, the loss of biodiversity will not be dealt with in Switzerland. It is concerning us all. So these issues deserve an international approach, and an international approach can be given into an institute like the Graduate Institute, which actually looks at helping the life of people who are going to work in international organizations. Now, I could reverse your question and ask, why is the multilateralism in crisis? I think multilateralism is in crisis because the free capitals are suffering. Social capital is suffering. We are no longer as united as we were 20 20 years ago. The human capital is suffering greatly. There are more and more people who don't really find the space into the system that we have built. And as usual, the bottom of all this is the natural capital, which tends to compensate for the mistakes that we humans are doing in terms of governance, in terms of social science, in terms of finance, in terms of a number of different ways we use the global common. And so for me, this notion that we are all in it together, again, the analogy we used in the book is the swimming pool. You know, if the swimming pool is dirty, then we all swim in dirty water. If you succeed in individually keeping it clean, it will be, we can swim each other without any consequence or help. So, in a nutshell, the term global has probably never been more appropriated than to talk about this particular issue. We have a global common which we need to manage together.
Thank you very much. My second question to you is really more connected to the center, and it's a very concrete question in a sense, which connects us with what we are going to work on in the coming years. So, what are your priorities for the center, and what will be your expectation in a sense? How will you measure success? How will we measure success of the center?
So before getting too technical, let's just talk about 2009, when I came to see your predecessor, and we were trying to say that, talking about planetary limits, talking about the problems of living all together on the globe, was not just the preserve of people who understood about nature. When we were trying to protect nature, we were trying to look at iconic species and at beautiful places. But clearly we had to expand this and to look at other ways where the other parts of the system were working. To give an example, WWF was created in early 60s to protect the rhinoceros, the rhino in East Africa. Today, we are still trying to protect the rhino in East Africa. So the root causes of the pressure on biodiversity has not been addressed by raising funds from the public and by spending it in the countries themselves. The root causes are much bigger. They're systemic, and they are a lot to do with the way we manage the planet. So the idea of going to the Institute and saying, could you please look at this in terms of economics, was at the time perhaps not as obvious as it is now. Today we know that we cannot create long-term value if we don't have a well-functioning nature. And I think that's the beauty of the work done here. And an academic institution can do three things. It can do research, it can do convening like we do tonight, but it can also, and more importantly, do teaching. And that teaching can only be valid if it is backed up by good research. So all this taken together means that there is an opportunity to go one step further in the Institute by increasing the field of studies, not just to environmental economics, but going into all sorts of other things. In particular, and I'm very excited about this, by creating a repository of data which will give us an idea of what of the state of biodiversity. So you have very wise people around the panel. They're all sort of specialists in their own field, and bringing them together is what I would consider a success. Now, how do you measure success? Wow. Thank you for the question, Marilo.
You work on this one.
The traditional measure would be publication flow, would be readership index or whatever it's called, impact factors. But what we really are talking about here is to make sure that the people who come out of the institute, the people who are then going to do their work in international institutions, do that with a slightly better understanding of what the planet is. The planet is complex. We cannot simplify everything. We cannot see, we cannot say there is a recipe for everything we want to do. We need flexibility. We need a certain polymathy. I don't know if that's English, but we need to be able to be flexible in a number of different things, and we need to be able to be sure that the people who are going to decide are not going to decide just on a personal front, but collectively. And public service is about this. So maybe the quality of the people who come out of here is going to be different after this program, and I for one very much welcome that.
Thank you very much, André. I'm going to turn to you, Patrick, now. Patrick, for the past 5 years, you've been building bridges, aiming to shape the next phase of the global financial system, with Switzerland and Geneva leading the way in sustainable finance. Bridges between the financial sector and international and national policymakers, bridges between academics and practitioners, bridges across countries, and bridges also across generations, with a lot of young students from here, but also from the Villa Institute have been involved in building bridges. I have a first question for you, Patrick, which has 2 dimensions, which is really what are the main lessons that you're drawing from this experience, but what are also the next frontiers for you?
Thank you very much for including me in the discussion. Congratulations to André for this excellent decision, and congratulations to you to have gained this support for the Graduate Institute. 5 years ago, we came to a very humble observation, which was basically to say this part of the world, this country and this city has all the ingredients to the discussion that we need to have to make the world change in a positive way. In a positive way with regard to sustainability, through exchanges of experiences, through talking to each other, perhaps defining a language that we could all understand. I think the platform was born in order to make sure that all these objectives could be met. Of course, we started by trying to defend a position, which was basically that we all can contribute to accelerate that transition. And we see that, while we certainly can contribute, the acceleration is still to occur. So I think the first lesson I got from this initiative of building bridges was a joint initiative by the private sector and the United Nations organizations, is to say that there's a recognized need for dialogue, there's a recognized input that can be given to the definition of a common language, which will make probably the transition easier, but there's still a lot to be done with regard to the speed at which this transition has to occur. The second is that building bridges was created to basically to offer a platform where people and experts can exchange experiences, can learn from each other, but also can decide to act, joining forces on certain, perhaps, individual initiatives. The lesson we drew from the last 5 years in this respect is that there are lots of prejudice on how this should be occurring. One of them is to look at the world by defining what the world can be in the north, what the world can be in the south, what the world can be east and west, and trying to make those parts of the world contribute to the benefits and the better well-being of others. I think while we say this, we don't do it in practice. Actually, we still go and look at the world as being a world where those who have, which by the way have created most of the damages, should teach the rest of the world on how they should manage the problems. Actually, through building bridges, we develop bridges to emerging countries or new frontier countries, which have shown how necessity obliging, some of the solutions can occur thanks to the right set of public policy, private capital, and of course a trust with regard to the longevity of a project. And this is something that we are now trying through building bridges to bring back to this part of the world, showing examples of emerging countries' solutions that are perfectly defendable and also extremely avant-garde, that could be serving as examples for some of our systems, politicians, here in this part of the world. Finally, and I think that while we all know that the facts have been brought by sciences well enough in the recent past, we still need to get literacy improved in most of our constituencies. And I think this is why anything that has to do with the learning process about what is it that we're talking about, sustainability and sustainable transition, has to be encouraged. And this is the third element that I would say is in my view, a lesson from the past years of dialoguing and exchanging with all the stakeholders that we have at Building Bridges, which, by the way, include one extremely important element, and you mentioned that, André, which is the civil society input. Because we leave it to experts. That's very well when it comes to expertise. But in general, if we do not include the civil society voices, we will never make those experts' views go through perhaps the political process or the decisions that we want to take.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And I would like also to ask you another question, which is, you mentioned civil society, but what about academia? And what about particularly, obviously, the center, the Hoffmann Center and the Geneva Graduate Institute, which has been involved over the past years already with Building Bridges. So what is your take on our role, on what we could contribute with this new center also?
Well, I think first and foremost, the pluridisciplinarity is going to be of the essence. I think, as I said before, the mix of expertise is of the essence, but it has to be realized, and this is not a given very often in the world. And I think this center here in Geneva that is now created can achieve that pluridisciplinarity to the benefit of perhaps explaining the situation in a more sensible way and perhaps finding solutions in a faster way as well. The second element that I think is going to be extremely important is this issue of data. And I think you're absolutely right mentioning that, we still miss a number of data. It's not an excuse not to act, of course. But, I was fascinated by seeing a recent initiative by the Financial Market Authority in Switzerland, willing to, talking about biodiversity and nature, make risk management, integrate nature risk into the processes. Well, I can tell you that, while we all would agree that would be a good idea because we all understand what could be the dangers inherent to not respecting nature, I don't think we can come to a global view of what it is that we mean by integrating nature risk into risk management. We need more information, we need more research, perhaps more standards, or I would say less standards, but more coordination between standards, so that the industries or the sectors can focus once for all on the right priorities. And I think the center could be an ideal places in these constituencies to create that focus, and perhaps last point, to create some simplicity. It looks a bit paradoxical, while research is, of course, very fundamental and very often complex. I think research can probably get to a point where it helps simplify some of these issues that are being discussed in the sustainability transition and makes the decision-making so slow.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Mark, I'm going to turn to you now. Mark, the IUCN has been at the forefront of nature conservation for decades. We all know that. But in your 2030 program, you're placing people at the core. So can you tell us more about what this implies for your work at the IUCN and for what the IUCN is?
So thank you, Maria Laura. Thank you for the panel. And first of all, I want to say, André, I just want to hug you, yeah, because I'm an accountant, yeah. When you said accountants are going to, take over the world, I kind of took that the liberty there and said, yeah, I'm an accountant. I'm going to thank you and hug you later. So. I can't sit here on stage, yeah, without actually bringing it back to the basics of what I'm motivated by, yeah. And over my years, I've worked in lots of poor places. I've worked in lots of poor countries, and I want to tell the story of a poor humanitarian or a poor Ethiopian woman, yeah. And what she has is a life where she has to walk to actually get to the forest. She has to take the wood. She then maybe takes that wood back, she maybe burns it to actually cook, maybe she makes charcoal from it, yeah? But the problem is that that's her life, and the forest is getting further away because she's denuding it. That's biodiversity loss. What's happening in the world is she can't replace her stove. Well, that's climate change, because then you're actually destroying the forest that can solve the problem. And then finally, what you've actually got is her justice, yeah? Her right to actually take up in the world her place and to aspire, yeah? And so just to fill you in on the rest of the story, I asked that poor woman, what do you aspire to being when you grow up, yeah? And she said, I want to be a pancake maker. I'm just like, okay, my life exists to actually help that woman become a pancake maker, and not just go and collect wood from the forest. So, where's IUCN going with this? I mean, we need to think about biodiversity, we need to think about climate change, and we need to think about social justice. I want to throw one statistic in here, which I think is really important. I worked for the Egmont Institute last year, writing humanitarian briefing papers for EU ministers. In 2016, there were 85 million displaced people across the world. Can somebody just have a guess? Forgive me, I'm just going to, can I ask the audience, yeah? Can somebody have a guess how many million people are displaced across the world now? Double that and keep going. Yeah, so it's between, sorry, you had a good guess, and please, if you want to have another guess. No, between 400 and 500 million people. This is not business as usual. And you're seeing the movement of people, you're seeing the destruction of ecosystems, you're seeing the loss of biodiversity at an accelerating rate. We have to do something about that as IUCN. So we've got a new strategy. Well, we're writing a new strategy. It has to be agreed by Congress. There'll be 8,000 to 10,000 people in the room, but that will affect millions across the world, billions, yeah? And we're putting biodiversity loss and climate change right at the heart of that, but we cannot forget that Ethiopian woman, so we've got to have that social justice as well.
And concretely, how does that impact your work? I mean, this is what I'm curious about, because this is also something that is important for us. How do we make that systemic approach a reality?
I think it's really interesting because I come from an academic background as well. I mean, on one shoulder you've got the social change you create, on the other shoulder you've got the finance. And here's a question: can you balance the two off? Yeah. Well, recent research says that you can't. So we've got to think about biodiversity, and then we've got to think about the money and the finance and the economic systems, well, socio-economic systems that drive that. But none of this will happen until we deal with the drivers of this loss. Yeah. So we've got to start to think about people. Yeah? And a lot of our framework donors, a lot of our key funders are just saying there's only one thing that really matters, and that's what Peter kindly in the book and Andre you've written about, which is socio-economic systems. We've got to address this for the future. And so what's it actually going to mean to us, or for us? We've got to bring governments, and we've got to bring the private sector, and we've got to bring civil society together, but then we've got to do one final thing, yeah? We've got to ask the people that we're actually working with, and that includes indigenous communities, so that we learn from them. And one of the things that I feel passionate about is they've had their own science and their own ways of doing things for years. We have to learn from that, yeah? And so IUCN is going to scale up its work, it's going to do more, but it's going to focus on the key drivers and the key issues that are making that change, as I say, for that poor Ethiopian woman.
Yeah. So, I mean, both Andre and Patrick were talking about impact and impact measurement. So how will you measure?
I mean, I used to run an impact consultancy, so you're running the last person. Have you got a couple of hours and we can... let's give you the formal definition of impact. Impact is the positives and the negatives you create by the work that you do. It's all of those changes attributable to your organization, but taking into account what we call dead weight, yeah? Dead weight was what would have happened in any case. So it's really complex, but I'm just going to break it down to simple things. It's the change we create. Yeah? So I think if, rather than trying to measure this, we just talk about the change we create and use the language of change, I think we move in that direction. I think we've got complex ecosystems. I mean, we've talked about complexity. I want to know the biggest levers we can pull to make a difference on people's lives and to make a difference on the planet and biodiversity and nature loss. That's what I really want to be able to do. So having worked in impact measurement for, 10, 15 years, I'm kind of jaundiced. I just want to ask the question, what's the biggest change and what's the biggest lever? I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. A very last short question is, what would be your suggestions for us, for the Centre?
Yeah, I just think this is an amazing opportunity, and I have one simple solution. You gave me the questions in advance, yeah. It's got to be practical. you know, so from whatever you, as academics, I mean, I'll just give you from my PhD research. I've got an interesting area of research, which is cost recovery and how do you cost and price charities, yeah? I had 18,600 papers that I had to read through. How many of those ever get into practical solutions for charities, for the planet? That's what I really want you to do, is to come with some practical solutions. Work with organizations like IUCN, because we really need those practical solutions. And also, thank you for giving us a space on stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Beatrice, I'm turning to you now. Beatrice, you've been working on international macroeconomics and crisis for many years, but in the past few years, I've seen how you've been turning very decidedly all your attention towards climate and nature finance, and I have to say I love that. So tell us why.
Well, Marilo, it's not because I discovered that currency crisis, banking crisis, and these other types of crises are unimportant or that they are costless. They still have lots of costs. They tear apart countries and societies. But there is one big, big difference. You know, a country, after it's had a big debt crisis, it will go into maybe emergency room. It may have to get, you know, treatment from the IMF, and it will eventually recover. And that is the big difference with the climate crisis. So once you realize that this is a completely different type of crisis, there is no recovery from going over. Or maybe there is a tiny amount that we can, if we hugely overshoot the emissions, can take out of the atmosphere eventually again. But right now, the situation is this, that we are contributing to the stock of emissions year by year by year, and the science, and that was for me, I think, really the moment where I said, okay, from now on, I'm going to think about this. The science is so fantastically clear, and it's the IPCC right around the door, you know, around the corner, who have been able to establish this, and to the satisfaction of 99% of the scientists on the world can predict quite clearly what happens if we keep at this pace. So it's not a secret. It's not difficult. It's actually quite easy and quite practical to understand how further increases in the CO2 concentration, in this case, in the air will impact the temperature. And then it's a bit more complicated. This is then when also economics comes back in to actually say what this means and where and what the costs are. But then it's also, at the end, not so complicated to say how we could solve it. The problem is that we do need the governance, the global governance, we need the markets, and we need the finance to actually solve it. And all of those things are not in place at the moment. So the answer is ultimately quite simple. I realized at some stage that the crisis I should be focusing on is the existential one, is the one that is irreversible. I mean, we all know that if the temperature increases enormously, warming increases enormously, it's not gonna, the planet is gonna survive. It's just the things that are on it, and, you know, that are in trouble. And that includes huge numbers of people that would be very, very quickly affected, and nature, of course, which we are already seeing. So the answer is simple. I mean, it's once I realized this is the one I need to be focusing on. That's when I started focusing on that.
And more concretely, what are the key burning questions that you're working on today?
Well, it's on the one hand side what I was telling you, and it's mostly so. On the one hand side, it's in terms of emissions and in terms of transformation, going from a brown to a green production system worldwide. One of the main accelerations that needs to happen is in the rest of the world. I mean, I'm now taking a leap of faith and saying, Europe, we will somehow mitigate up and downs, but we have systems in place to, in principle, mitigate. I even think the US is somehow going to go on that path. But what about the rest of the world? What about the poorer countries? What are we actually saying to Africa? We're saying, you have to jump from brown to green in one go, because you can't first start digging out your coal and burning it, as we did, or we keep doing. And we are saying to India and so on that they need to invest enormous amounts of capital without really providing it for them. So the climate finance at the moment is about 100 billion. It's way not enough compared to the estimates that we need in order to do this transformation. So this is one thing I'm working on. The other one I have been, really increasingly passionate about is the biodiversity, is the nature loss, and how it relates to climate change. And yes, André, I agree. Probably we've burned the word biodiversity in this last Abstimmung. It's really terrible that once things get politicized, and even yesterday on TV, I could hear somebody saying, "Oh yes, we have to solve this punctually." It's like the moderator asked, what do you mean by punctually? He said, well, there may be certain birds somewhere that need to be saved punctually. It's like, yeah, exactly, that's how it works, right? Yeah, so just to illustrate the scale of education that needs to happen, but this includes, I think, when it comes to nature, and somebody said this, it's much, much more complicated. You said it before, I think. It's much more complicated, it's much more local. The interactions are negative with climate change, but they can also be positive if we find nature-positive solutions and can deploy them at scale. There are many, many processes that we need to understand, and where actually still the science and the economics need to work together. So I am passionate about deploying, economists have a very powerful engine, which is the thinking about how the market should work. I'm not saying how the market is working, but how it should work. And that includes, when we include the fact that markets fail, and how to solve that, that's something we understand. Something that we understand, I think, better than many, many other disciplines. So this machine we need to deploy.
And finally, what do you want to achieve as co-director of the center? What is going to be your own measure of success?
Well, I have noted, of course, the measures of success, and I would agree, of course, the education part, but on that one, I am very confident. I mean, this institute is already, we had an apéro before this panel, and there were at least 70 students from all different tracks that are all interested in the notion of, not only notion of sustainability, they want to work on it. Several came up to me afterwards and said, look, I'm doing this and this on oceans, I'm doing this, how can I contribute, what can we do? So there is in this institute a lot of potential that we can even mobilize even more. And yes, practical solutions. That's what I mean, and at scale. That's what I would also add to that. It is about. We can bring, I think, through our diverse networks and linking them with the enormous power of international Geneva, which is here, the bridges that are being built by Patrick and made the international organizations. We can, I hope, really add the academic spark by also bringing an academic stream of people. We are already working on that, of visitors, of seminars, etc., and of actual work that can contribute to solving some of these problems, and hopefully at scale. I mean, my ambition is definitely at scale.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Dominique, last but not least. Dominique, you're joining the Institute this month, and we're really delighted to welcome you. In your research, and for example, in your new book, The Peace Formula, you make the point that we should understand sustainability in a truly global and integrated sense, including democratic governance and peace. Can you explain to us what you mean by that?
Yeah, so when André was talking about big challenges faced by humanity, you mentioned peace and you mentioned sustainability, and so let me, in general, I think one of the things why we're so excited about this new center is the notion of global sustainability. And we really, what we mean by global is this two-dimensional of global. It's global in a sense that it's beyond frontiers. It's about interdisciplinarity, and there the Geneva Graduate Institute is kind of a champion of this. And the other thing is global in the terms of geography, and there International Geneva is kind of a champion of it, and we're right in the heart of it. So we're particularly well placed. And so let me just elaborate a bit on how my own research has kind of fit into that. So I started out in political science. I'm now an economist. So there is a bit of this notion of interdisciplinarity already. But then much of my specialization has been on armed conflict, on how to promote peace, and very often also linked to environmental questions. And so are these things, is this guy here, Dominic, just kind of combining randomly two buzzwords that sound good, or is there actually a link between sustainability, the environment, and peace? Well, there's a big link. And so in my research, for example, I've studied something that we like to call the resource curse. The resource curse is about what's going wrong in petrostates and what's going wrong with natural resource discovery. So we've written a series of papers, and we started that endeavor like at least 15, 20 years ago. And what we've found in this literature is that the effects of producing oil and gas and some types of minerals can be very, very detrimental to politics. So for example, the risk of interstate wars goes up. The risk of civil wars goes up. The risk of massacres of civilian populations, ethnic cleansing, all these risks, they are multiplied very strongly with natural resource discoveries. And beyond that, there's also democracy suffers, corruption goes up. And so why is this the case? Well, the case, and so all of this, so this body of evidence is literally hundreds of studies that have found this. And when so if I quote one of my own studies, that is called This Mine is Mine, for example, there we find that actually 20% of conflicts in Africa in the last 30 years can be attributed to a competition about controlling some types of natural resources, minerals in particular. And so why is this such a powerful driver of conflict? Well, it's because it's something that it's a powerful engine of something to grab. So it's an attractive price to appropriate, but it constitutes funding. If some of us have these T-shirts of Che Guevara on it, the beautiful ideological rebel, but in reality, very often rebels need to be paid. It's a job. And if you have control of the mines of Kivu in some region of the DRC, well, that will help you to fund this. And so what you see, and there's also plenty of micro studies. Even if there was a study, for example, in Brazil, a democratic country, where in some new oil discoveries would lead to less favorable governance, more corruption in these municipalities where oil was found. And so you see that nobody is an island. So even if now in Geneva we were to find oil, we know what may happen, right? So there is a way out. So there are also some interesting articles showing that countries like Norway, for example, have been able to contain some of this bad energy. And also if you invest money in human capital, that's kind of, so there's also a book we once wrote where we make this point of saying the good thing about human capital, and that's what all the universities in Switzerland are about, is basically that human capital cannot be stolen as easily as physical capital. So if you take the physical capital, a pile of money from oil, and you transform it in human capital, well, that kind of shields you a bit of this negative energy. So that's this first part. Just stop me if I talk too much. So the first part is this resource curse.
Yeah.
Then there is something else that's really important, and that's the link between climate change and conflict. And there's this other link. And there we also have a recent paper that's called Heat and Hate that just got accepted in one of the best journals in economics. And where what we do is we look with data. So you seem to, many people around here like data. So what we do is we look at very local projections of where climate change is likely to lead to the highest spikes in temperatures over the next 20 years, taking this straight from natural scientists. And then we would interact that with a variety of conflict-relative variables linked to, for example, ethnic rivalries. And what we find is a very heterogeneous pattern where actually the risks of climate change fueling conflict is very heterogeneous. For example, the Sahel zone in Africa is particularly at risk. But overall, a warming of 2 degrees Celsius is something in the ballpark of increasing risk of maybe 40% or something like that. So we're talking about a serious problem. And last sentence on that to answer the question. It's a vicious cycle in the sense that what you see is more conflict also destroys the environment. So there are plenty of studies, even if you look at the burning oil wells of Kuwait, or now the images from war in Ukraine. I mean, that's obviously not good for the environment, all these explosions and everything. And some people have quantified it, and it's actually sizable. So it's not an anecdote, but it has a direct impact. And so we're like in this negative spiral, basically.
Thank you very much, Dominique. Thank you very much to all of you. And I'm turning now to the room and opening up for questions. I think there's a mic coming here. So who wants to start? There's a question here. Yeah. Maybe you introduce yourself when you ask the question.
Hi, Karen Wilson, GV Partners. So thank you so much for this great discussion, and congratulations again on the book and the center. I wanted to come back to this, the role of changing the economic system. And systems change is complex. And you talked about the 4 capitals and also about the key levers. And so we're starting to get some clarity around what those are. But there's still more work to be done on that. But I guess the question then comes to the leadership. Who are the people that need to pull those levers? And what kind of incentives need to be put in place that those levers are pulled? How do we make sure there's really action that's going to lead to the kind of systems change that we need? Thank you.
Okay, very easy question. Who wants to?
Shall I maybe just give it a try, and then the academics, which are much cleverer than me, can sort of come back. For me, what capitalism does is 3 things. The first thing is asset allocation, and that's what you do when you invest. Yeah? As soon as you allocate your asset to something, you need to protect it, and you get involved into risk management. Now, risk management, by the way, academics like that. Okay. So, asset allocation, risk management. And if you want to compete in the marketplace, this is the third thing that capitalism does, competition. You are going to have to make sure that you win the market. And you win the market today in our current environment by charging the lowest possible price for the biggest possible outcome. Now that is where it fails, because that's pulling us downward. When I went to university, when I went to business school, I was told the market is always right. Don't believe it, it's a lie. The market is not always right. We need to compensate for it, we need to regulate regulate it. And you need to regulate it on data points that make sense. And these data points that make sense are the ones that understand the interaction, the interdependence of the free capitals. The ones that are telling us that when you make a movement in one direction, well, it has an impact on the others. The one that mirror the complexity of biodiversity and of nature. And that would be my greenhorn explanation. Anybody else wants to join in?
Maybe. Yeah, whoever wants to start, Mark, Beatrice maybe, and then Mark.
I would absolutely agree with you, André, that the market is not, I mean, no, I would disagree with you, sorry, that the market is a perfect solution. And I am still surprised that they taught you that at business school, because definitely they don't teach you that at that business school anymore, because we're talking about the same business school here, that you are also helping to change. But more generally speaking, I mean, no good economist would say that. Nobody who is a real economist would say the market never fails. No, to the contrary, we start out from the fact that markets fail, and especially they fail when you have global commons. What is there more global common than our joint atmosphere that we breathe and make and warm? And also nature is a global common, it's also a local common, it's also a regional common, which makes it more complicated, as we already said. But there are solutions for global commons, but we cannot expect the private sector to do it alone. I mean, we cannot expect firms we can put a lot of pressure on them, we can put a lot of voluntary, indices and metrics and so on, but ultimately there will need to be some form of regulation that requires firms not only to disclose, but also to act. And that is, disclosure is just the first step towards acting. So we need much more simple metrics. They need to be elevated to the place where they are no longer voluntary. And ultimately, what we need is pricing nature. There needs to be a value of nature. There needs to be a price for nature. That would also then create the funding to protect it and to make sure there is not further nature loss. So that's where we need to go. And I think that's why I understand you in terms of, it's not really the accountants, it's the fact that you put a value on something, right? That's what you mean, or isn't it? Well, I read your book, Well,
thank you for having done that. But I think we both agree. It's for the regulator to pull the levers you're referring to.
So, Mark.
I don't know if I'm not sure if the mic is working. Yeah, it's lovely. I spent 5 years of my life struggling with this exact question. And so at the business school in London, at Bayes Business School, I was invited to take up all the social investment work here. And so what I saw on one side was we had these demonstrable investments that were making change for nature or for people or for social. On the other side, we had ESG. Yeah, but the force of investment capital was profound. It was gravitational compared to everything else. So here's my humble thinking. You need government money, and governments have to be able to move. And there's sub-governments that sit underneath those in terms of cities. Cities, governors, mayors, for example, can move in this direction. You've got the private sector, which will actually enable that, and the flows of capital that sit behind that. Yeah, you've got civil society, which will actually stand in underneath that and will actually give a voice to those people that it's working with, but we have to start to negotiate between social investment, which is demonstrable, yeah, and GRI, for example, and ESG and investments which are actually sometimes are measuring data points, but do they have any integrity behind it? Final thought for you. At the business school, we said, what could be the biggest lever? We realized pension funds. So we went after pension funds, got them in a room to start talking about nature and to start talking about capital. So you can all go and invest in nature through your pension funds. That'll make a huge difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick, one.
one or two additional thoughts. First of all, I think that the transparency on the way the system works today will probably be one of the strongest trigger to system change. And I think this is now happening, so I am rather positive on this one, and I think what we're going to see in the next 3 to 5 years coming from the transparency of the value chain of the world production is going to transform quite radically the way some of the actors, and not the least of those actors, i.e. the corporations in general, the industry in general, will behave. And that will change some of it already. The second thing is that we will have, whether it's easy or not, to address the notion of sharing the cost of the transformation. And sharing the cost of the transformation has to do with the debate of what's the charge to be borne by the public sector and what's the charge to be borne by the private sector. And here there are still some discussions that are quite difficult, because as soon as you touch subsidies and taxes, you politicize the issue, and the last thing you want to do is to politicize, although it's partially done already, sustainability and the transition.
Thank you very much. Do we have, we have a question here. Yeah. Lady here.
Thank you. My name is Vera Lalchevska, and I actually did my PhD here at the Graduate Institute nearly 10 years ago in development studies, sustainable development. I have a couple of challenges, perhaps. One is that I believe that you all touched about the human aspects of development and of sustainability, each in your own way. Mark mentioned the Ethiopian women, Patrick keeping it simple and making it understandable. Andre mentioned the unhappiness and anger by the youth, and also he talked about humility and courage of leaders and having new ideas, and how the model of prosperity currently is not sustainable. So where is the outside of the box thinking in this new center? And by that I mean there's 7 programs. Where's the human center? Where's the human-centered program out of the 7? So I wanted maybe to bounce that back to you and ask whether there will be in the future, and whether people
Can I start, and then I give it to you? For me, it's everywhere, and it should be everywhere, definitely, in all the 7 themes and around the 7 themes, and it also in the interactions between that center and the other centers. The human factor is at the core of our overall strategy at the Institute. This is something that we're very clear on, so it should be all over the place.
Okay, maybe I can break it down a little bit further. So there's a focus on trade, right? Could you remind me of the 7 centers, of the 7 programs?
Well, maybe we don't have, because we have other questions, so, but I'll let maybe Beatrice
so just wanted
Dominique,
to, so could you maybe just, maybe I'm just opening the question here to brainstorm out loud. Will there be, as I think we all know by now, that the hardest hit portion of the 8 billion people we are here is going to be children, right? Because we are looking at the climate change, we're looking at AI and everything that's going to affect. There's a lot of effect already on the health of children, et cetera, et cetera. So perhaps, you know, an outside of the box thinking at a pluridisciplinary institute could be a focus. Why not have something that's not, you know, the usual suspects, the trade, the economics, etc. I do hold a PhD in development studies from the Graduate Institute and a master's in development policy from Duke University. So I hear you, humans are everywhere. But could you go a little bit further than all the other educational institutions and make it really the center of attention?
Okay. Beatrice, do you want to complete? For me, we are putting it at the center,
yes.
but
no, I don't think I can add anything. Yeah. I mean, look. You have to look at the institute as a whole, first of all. So we are here one center, not not one among many, but we are an important center, but there are many other centers that are focusing on other things. Migration, for instance, is all about humans moving. You know what? There is a connection with climate change, and quite an unfortunate one. Will that be part of things that we look at? Yes, of course. But we don't need to have a stream on everything in order to look at it. I would agree with Marie-Laure. It's all about humans. Well, maybe also about the animals.
So if I may add my 2 cents to this, I mean, before when we talked with the very inspiring students of the environmental track, with many of whom are in the room, when they ask what will be different with the new center with respect to the existing center that was also pioneered by André, and the comparison that I gave to them is like a tree. You have a tree. The tree is rooted, and now every year there's a new layer around the tree. And what we are doing is we are thinking more global now. We're thinking broader. We add layers to the tree, but the existing tree, the fundamental tree that was there, that was planted, the seed by Andrew and others some years back, is still there. It's just growing. It's getting stronger. It's getting broader. And that's exactly what we want to do. We build on existing work. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and we broaden up. And it's true that everything, like many of these things, when we think about grand challenges, many of the people who reject environmental measures would be driven by populist parties. Much of the resistance against environmental taxes come from people who have a hard time economically and blame the need for more sustainability for their difficult situation. They are wrong in the sense that we need to go towards sustainability. We don't have a choice. But of course, you're completely right that we have to keep, for example, equity considerations, equality consideration. All of that needs to be at the heart of it. Because if you have green policies that are regressive, where some people pay a much higher bill than the others, there will be huge backlash that will help populists, and that will shut down the whole positive nature progress. And so that's why and that's also something that in the Institute, maybe Marie-Laure can say more about that, but equity is also a very important dimension of the Institute, and that's exactly why this center is really well located here.
Yeah. But I won't, because there are so many questions. So, what I propose is that we take all the 4 questions. Yeah, so I see too many hands. So, we take as many questions as possible, if possible short, and then we have a final round, okay? So remember the questions.
Yes. Good evening to all. I'm Jean-Pierre Raymond, the head of 2050 Today. I would like to make one remark, advice, and one question. First of all, I agree with more or less all what you said. But basically, you provided us with what is the problem and what are the solutions. But somehow it's missing what is the mechanism to implement the solution. And if we take the example of the vote of yesterday in Switzerland, I mean, we completely failed. 63% of the Swiss people, one of the countries you have most liberties, just said no to life, basically. So how do we change the narrative? And I think here the center can provide help, how you can provide global solutions that can be implemented at scale and rapidly, because we don't have any time to lose. What are the mechanisms to be implemented? For example, carbon pricing. How do we make universal carbon pricing a reality? How do we avoid now deep sea mining? And I advise this center to provide this solution. So I would like to be happy to hear you on the solution you would like to be seen and implemented very rapidly.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. Maybe you can give the mic here.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. A big shout out to all of you. It's the first time I hear these type of comments and reflections coming out of the financial sector, if you wish. And thank you very much for that. So each of you have personal stories. Some of them I'm aware of, as I was telling with André. And it's just amazing what you guys are doing. Now, my name is Carl Bjertnæs. I am president of something called SEEDS Africa. SEEDS is an acronym for Social Entrepreneurship and Enterprise Development Strategies. And what I've heard from all of you is exactly the sort of questions I'm getting from the number 2 people in Mali, in Nigeria, in Burkina Faso, in Ousmane Sonko, in Senegal, and so on. How can you, as an organization, help address the problems they have? Because they're basically having to fight against the international system of the World Bank, the IMF, and the World Trade Organization. The three, I think Jean Ziegler calls them les trois cavaliers de l'Apocalypse. So, I mean, how are we going to change the system? They're walking away from it, and they're looking for solutions. You guys have the solutions here with what I've heard tonight.
Thank you. Can we go here? Just here.
Okay, where do I go?
And if we can make the questions a little bit shorter, because otherwise, because there's a lot of hands.
Hello, my name is Sharif. I'm studying my master's degree in sustainable development. Thank you so much for this insightful discussion. My question is, are there any plans to collaborate with countries and institutions other than Switzerland, particularly in developing nations? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Then I think we had a lady here behind you. Yeah, thank you.
Merci beaucoup. My name is Kathleen Charles, and I'm known as a practitioner, especially working a lot in Africa many years. But my question follows on to Carl's in a way. How do we look at sustainability without looking at impact investors and looking at how impact investment can be recycled or into the proper sectors that really need assistance, and how building bridges can actually establish linkages among the civil society, public-private sectors, and to make this into more of a reality, and how the center can also support this effort. So it's a link between the two.
So I'll take only 2 more, because otherwise I think I'm going to lose my panel. and then we'll close.
Good evening, Vincent Schotte. I'm in advisory of project finance, renewable energy. I'm based in Brussels. I very much like the intervention of the gentleman there. He calls for immediate action, and I'm in the action. And what I heard here is industry has to do something, regulation, policymakers have to do something, but we can do something, we as individuals. And my question to the audience is, do you already have an electric car? Because I can tell you, total cost of ownership of an electric car is very, very, very interesting, and much more interesting than a car with a combustion motor. Is the same. How do we heat our house? In the Western world, only a few people heat their house in a sustainable way, and there again, levelized cost of energy now is already much, much cheaper when you do it in a sustainable way than with fossil fuels. And so why are we not going for it? And I think this is individual responsibility.
Okay, and over there in the back will be the last question. It's Lee. Lee, sorry, I didn't recognize you from far. Yeah. But I think it's recorded.
Thank you. Just a very quick. We have progress being made on the carbon pricing front, and there's a discussion on the biodiversity pricing front. So my question to the panel is, how do we avoid these two things moving in parallel when they should be integrated? Because that's, to me, sounds like the secret here, if we can get them come together, because the system is already, as we all know, there's a COP in biodiversity and there's a COP in climate, and that's probably the original sin there, but we can sort of make up for it, it seems, if we could somehow get the two pathways on carbon pricing, things like CBAM happening, and now with biodiversity. So I'd love to hear how we make those streams come together.
Thank you very much. Okay, Patrick, I'm going to start with you.
Which question?
Whatever you want, whichever you want.
So the solution mechanism. First of all, I'd like to say that there are some solution mechanisms that exist already. It's not that we're just facing a world without any potential solutions. If you take some of the examples, if you take, for instance, the pricing of so-called externalities, positive or negative, there are experiences made and there are progresses made in this field. The fact that we're now criticizing heavily the fact that there's a European carbon market that has border is, in my view, not constructive, because it will simply lead to additional complexity in trying to tackle this issue. The fact that Europe is trying to get a solution with regard to what is acceptable in terms of CO2 intensity or not is going in the right direction for a solution. The reality is that we have not yet found a way to expand that to the global world, but is this the priority that we have to follow? It's not sure. I think the priority is perhaps to replicate market mechanism in different countries. Think of Brazil, and the next COP will probably help do that, which are big enough to make sure that a market would be useful in this respect. So solutions may not be global, yes, it's true, why? Because complexity exists, but they could be partial, and I think we should not necessarily neglect what is already trying to be built. Where we miss solution, for instance, and I think André is pushing in this direction, rightly so, is trying to price positive externalities. Positive externalities, meaning nature, giving a price to nature would probably help respect nature, including biodiversity differently, as the famous used to say. Bees do not send invoices, and it's not from me. It's a say that I think tells exactly what it is. The day we know what's the value of nature, and we consider, because we have changed our mindset, that nature is not the problem to solve, but the solution to the future well-being of humanity, I think we will have won a lot of credit. The role of building, maybe I quickly take this one since I was specifically asked, the role of the building bridges of this world is simply to try to make sure that the awareness of those solutions is being optimized, and that based on that awareness there's probably new coalitions and willingness to replicate that will take place. And finally, one element that I think you know very well, Lee, is the fact that we should also look at the inherent component of growth and try to modify this inherent component of growth in a way that will integrate sustainability. It's not only climate and nature, or nature and human, etc., but it also to make sure that the trading system that is at the origin of the development of growth in general will be modified quickly enough and smartly enough to integrate sustainability criterion in its system.
Thank you. I will turn to Mark. You pick which one you want. Huh?
Happily. I mean, there was two gentlemen that talked about mechanisms, and you had your hand up and down, and so I'm really happy to actually answer your question. I just want to talk a little bit about IUCN. Yeah, so IUCN is an amazing organization with about 1,500 members. And what we do is we pull together governments, we pull together civil society, we pull together indigenous people. We give a voice to everybody across the world to actually come and talk. And so I just wrote down, some of the mechanisms we're using. So convening, we've got 8,000 to 10,000 people coming to talk about nature and biodiversity next year in Abu Dhabi. That's an amazing platform to start to do things for the future. Knowledge and data, we're creating 8 hubs around specific things, these levers for the future that are going to make a difference. Yeah. So, for example, the oceans or energy transition, and how does that impact nature? We've got to have policy. We've got to have advocacy. We've got to have people standing up and actually addressing some of these resolutions that have been put forward. Capacity building. We've got to help the poorest. and help them to actually, learn and to have, generate their ideas. And for example, in your line of business, there's a massive problem. There's loads of microfinance. For example, Rwanda is 95%, I think, covered in microfinance, but there's no capital after that. We call it gazelle capital, so that those small businesses can grow. There's nothing there, yeah? It's a simple solution. Mobilizing our funds and building awareness is the final thing. But thank you, this gentleman over here, I can't see very well, yeah, for talking about urgency. Because we can't do this without urgency. And I think in conversations like this, the urgency gets lost. Thank you for putting that back on the table.
Thank you. Dominique, you want to say a few things?
Yeah, so I may specifically answer to the gentleman with the pink tie. Purple tie. So basically, the question you asked is very fundamental, I think. You asked the question, well, why don't we get majorities in a country like Switzerland, for example, and also elsewhere for green policies? Why do we have this failure in popular votes? And I think it's a key question, because I don't think we should go down the route of abolishing democracy, but we need to strengthen democracy. So we need to we need to get everybody on board. We need to have a broad consensus and a popular majority. There's no other way to do it. And I think I would think of three factors. So the first factor is the problem with many green taxes is that they hit poorer households harder. So if you're super rich and you pay 100 francs more for electricity, it doesn't make a difference. But if you have a very low budget, it makes a huge difference. So what we need is to combine it with the redistribution. So we need to have fair green taxes. The second thing is better communication. So often populists, if you listen to Forum or so at RTS, you would have some of the anti-green politicians. They would be really good at hammering down one line, and then the expert would explain something complex and nobody gets it. And so I think we need to be much better at communication. And the third thing is, I think there is really some need for more data and for more fundamental academic research, because lobbies they have huge stakes. They can lose a lot of money if we do something good for society. So they will fight really hard to prevent positive change. And so what we need is the academic firepower of really transparency and good data to help. And for all these things, I think we're well placed to our contribution.
Beatrice?
Let me pick up on two questions. I think the question, well, can you provide us a simple solution now, was asked more than once, and also because it's urgent. So no, we don't have all the simple solutions now, but let me give you one that I feel very, very strongly about, which is not a global one, but is almost something global. The Amazon is a global common, at least in some parts, because we should globally care if the Amazon is no longer there, and it is at risk. The next COP is also the G20 in Brazil, and it is an opportunity for doing something at scale for the Amazon. There is a proposal, and this is actually a research paper that looks in detail with geolocational data at what it would cost to compensate the existing cattle owners and employ all the workers and do a solution for the Amazon at scale, not a few square meters here and there, and you protect something and then they just move next door, which is part of what is the problem right now. There is so much goodwill, there are so many initiatives, but they may be protecting one square meter, one square, and the square next door or a little bit further gets impacted. So we need, when I say at scale, the scale can also be a scale which is regional, like the whole of the Amazon biome. But can this be done just by, telling Brazil, now you protect it? No. there needs a lot of funding for this. Is it a lot of funding compared to what the costs are of the full transformation and of and the benefits of the global common? Of course not, but let me give you the number. What comes out of this research paper, it's about 16 billion just for the Brazilian part. The whole biome would be more per year for about 20 years. So it's not something that, any country will cough up voluntarily, quickly, but it should be in the realm of feasible, because it's not the kind of, we're not talking trillions. Very quickly, when you're looking at these climate and adaptation gaps, you're talking trillions. The other one, very, very briefly, because I think that's an absolutely very valid point. It's one of my focus areas. Can we integrate biodiversity and carbon markets? Should we integrate them? I don't think the science is quite yet there. From a practical point, I see absolutely, yes, integrate them makes it easier because carbon markets work a bit. And therefore, just add nature markets on that. But I'm not sure it's the right solution. And the right solution in the sense of we need the pricing to get the pricing right for both. And sometimes, you can grow a ton of carbon, but it's not doing anything for biodiversity. Clearly, then you wouldn't want to have a joint product there, right? So I think this is really frontier to understand the market design for global biodiversity, nature markets, and carbon markets, how to integrate and where not to integrate.
Thank you. André, you have the last words.
Well, thank you very much, Marie-Laure, and you've heard already quite a lot from me, so I'll try to keep it short before you go to do something else. First of all, Lee, you're absolutely right. The two markets should be united, and we've spoken about Brazil several times already. The first thing we should do is to unite the two COPs. Why do we have a COP for biodiversity, and why do we have a COP for carbon? We need to put them together, and Brazil is the best place for it to happen. Belém, the Amazon, the G20 taking place at the same time. There is a wonderful opportunity there to bring all these things together, because I think there is a natural bridge between the carbon issue and biodiversity, and that natural bridge is a biological issue. We are made out of carbon. Life is based on carbon. We are organic matter, and therefore every single species protected is a carbon sink. There's this wonderful statistic where a blue whale absorbs more carbon than more than 1 million trees. We have sort of focused on this nature-based history that if you plant 1 trillion trees, you're going to save the planet. No, you need to look at systems, and that's the difficulty of what we've been discussing all night long. So I think that particular piece can probably be addressed. But if I can just sum up just a last thought. I mean, something which for me appears quite extraordinarily important, and I'm very grateful that the question was asked. The part of the brain that knows and the part of the brain that does, it's not the same part. Now, that each one of us can influence the issue by our individual movement towards putting together the condition for sustainable prosperity is not just a question of consumption. It's also a question of good common sense. How can we move through life with the discerning judgment that will make sure that we preserve the benefit to all rather than the benefit to the few. So driving an electric car is a wonderful idea, thank you very much, but you don't do it just because you like the electric car, you do it because it is a benefit to all. Now, coming back to these two different parts of the brain, how do we link that? How do we make sure that the brain that knows joins with the brain that does, and how can you make sure that we act in a way which is common sense? Well, we do a lot of work in mental health. What we are talking about is schizophrenia. And schizophrenia is a pathology. We need to cure it. We need therapy. And to get the best possible therapy for combating schizophrenia, you need to work on your own happiness. Now, make sure you repeat that around you. Only happy people will save the planet. We will not save the Amazon if we continue in an unequal and unjust social system. We need to address that first, and then we can do the rest. And that's something you can all do. It's not just a question of CO2, of course. It's a question of each individual attitude. If we can find ourselves, if we can fulfill our dreams by doing the right thing to the collectivity, we are going to go a big step forward towards saving biodiversity. And I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. This was a great time.